In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Hello again, viewers, and a very warm welcome to you, and a very, very warm welcome to Heather Wells. Hello, Heather.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Forgive me for not knowing where you come from. Where are you in the country?
So I am in Columbus, Indiana,
Okay.
and it's the home of Cummins Engine Company and NASCAR driver Tony Stewart and Vice President Mike Pence.
Wow, you got a lot going on.
I'm not on the signs when you come into the city, but I'm working on it.
Okay, you're working on it. Well, we're so happy that you're with us, and a happy little announcement here. Heather is going to be with us, Lord willing, for an extended amount of time from here on out. We'll see. We'll see how long we get to keep her, but for a couple of weeks, a month is what on average, maybe. So, yay. Yay, yay, because as I've told you in private, in our one-on-one conversations, I love your energy. I love your energy, Heather Wells. So let's get rolling on our topic tonight. I was just going to say as an intro that we've talked about temptation this whole month. We talked about what it is, how to not be fooled by subtle temptations, and how to prevent temptations, and some specific techniques that we have found most useful in our lives for overcoming temptation. And so tonight, Heather and I are going to explore a variety of biblical accounts to gain various insights from both the failures and the victories in the scriptures over temptation. So you're going to kick off this conversation with who, Heather, in the Bible?
Okay, so I immediately thought when you gave me this topic about Penina and Hannah and how both of these women were in situations where they desperately wanted something very natural and didn't have it. Penina wanted a good marriage, a man who adored her. And Hannah wanted a mother-child relationship. But how those women went about facing their situations was wildly different. And not just in their approach, but in their outcomes. So we can find this story in 1 Samuel chapter 1. It tells us all about Hannah and Penina. But I really want to sit a minute with Penina because I think she quickly becomes the villain in this story. But how often have we known someone or been in a season of our own marriage where we just don't feel loved? That is a real hurt. And in Proverbs 12:13, it says, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but when desire comes, it's a tree of life. So that she felt heartsick about this hope of having Elkanah's love, that part's real and honest. The problem is she took her situation and was tempted towards bitterness, ingratitude, envy, aggressive behavior. And because she gave into those temptations, it affected all her relationships. So first, it affects her relationship with Hannah. The scriptures say that they actually describe Penina as Hannah's rival. And it says that she would, in one version, it says provoked her severely to make her miserable. In another, it says that Penina taunted Hannah severely. And another, Penina provoked her in order to irritate her. I mean, this is just an unhappy woman looking
Yep.
for every chance to poke at Hannah's most tender spot. And that was all coming out of her pain that she was not handling well. So, in addition to becoming her rival, she could have, now, granted, they're in a unique situation because they're both married to the same man. But as women, they might have been able to meet in that they each wanted something they didn't have. And instead, Hannah was actually, she seemed to rejoice. I mean, not Hannah, Penina seemed to rejoice in Hannah's calamity. And in Proverbs, right? In Proverbs 16, verse 5, it says, he who mocks the poor reproaches his maker. He who is glad at calamity will not go unpunished. And the scriptures just hold true. She rejoiced that Hannah did not have a baby, and her calamity was not getting the relationship that she wanted with Elkanah. Because while the scriptures don't talk about their relationship, I think we can easily conclude, right, that they did not, she wasn't helping herself. She wasn't endearing herself to Elkanah by this behavior. Right? I mean, who wants to hug a cactus? Nobody.
Exactly.
And he's been clear how much he loves Hannah. Well, how do we feel when people mistreat our loved ones? That doesn't make us want to reach out, be vulnerable with them, right? So she's self-sabotaging the relationship she wants. She's not meeting Hannah at a place where they might be able to console one another. And then I wondered this. How do you think this affected her children?
Oh, right. That's true. Watching this example, they're learning how to relate to other people. Watching this go on, that's true. We don't think about that, do we? That we're being watched.
Yes. And so how is she now going to tell her children, be kind to each other?
Right.
They see her up close and personal, day in, day out, just torturing Hannah. So, and I think the biggest relationship affected by her decision to give into this temptation was her relationship with God. You know, God was willing to be her perfect husband. That might not have been what Penina wanted. She wanted a husband with flesh on, but God is always ready to fulfill our deepest needs if we'll let him. And she could have had a perfect husband in him, but instead she does things to distance herself. You know, God has to have a soft heart to work with. Her heart was very hard. And he has to have his children being kind to one another. She was very unkind. So in all of her pain, instead of giving that to God, she nurses it. And it just affects every relationship in her life. So that was, do you have any thoughts on Penina? That story tugs at me so much.
Yeah. Well, I just love that you're getting into the relationship aspects of this, because I think most of the challenges that we have are within our relationships. And it also, so that was the first thing that hit me as you were speaking. The other thing that hit me is how much of our temptations are about what we allow ourselves inside, because of our perspective, to be starving for. So these two women, you know, they're both hungry for something that they don't have. And so just kind of, it reminded me of that proverb that says, guard over your heart with all diligence, for from your heart flows, you know, pretty much everything in life, you know, all aspects of life. And so, and just the fact that what you're willing to do when you get that hungry for the thing that you want and that you don't have. And you're just going to trample over the people in your life. This desperateness, and that's observed by all her family and anyone else, kids and others that were looking on. So that's some of what was going through my head while you were presenting on that. So,
Yeah. And I think too about with her kids, how must they have felt? You know, mom's so miserable, but what are we? She can't find any joy in us.
Right.
And I think when what you're talking about, when we're so myopic on what we want, we just develop this attitude of not seeing the other blessings. We're just,
Yeah.
attitude of ungratefulness because we don't see, well, but I have these children, I have these other things, and I'm going to let God make up the difference where I'm lacking. And that's really what we see in going to Hannah. So is it okay if I pop over to Hannah?
Go for it.
So with Hannah, her situation is that she wants a baby. She's longing for a relationship. She doesn't have that mother child. And those closest to her either don't understand. If you'll recall, Elkanah says to her, "Are I not better to you than 10 children?" All right. And don't you just want to go, "No, Elkanah, that's not how this works. Children don't replace husbands. Husbands don't replace children." So he doesn't really get it. And then the other person that she would at least be close to in proximity is Penina, and she's constantly giving her grief about it.
Right.
So Hannah must have felt very alone in this desire. And so she had, that's her situation. So she could have been tempted to allow that desire to destroy her other relationship as a wife. It appears that she didn't do that he loved her deeply. She could have used it to wall her heart up against God, that God, you haven't given me this. And if only I had this, then I could be faithful to you. Then, and I think that's a real temptation to think that our circumstances are the key to our faithfulness.
Right. That I'm going to be faithful to God if there's benefits in this life that I guess it's a little bit like the prosperity gospel or whatever you call it. Like if there's prosperity always guaranteed, then I will stay connected to God and continue to be faithful to him.
Yes.
Temptation.
Absolutely. Yeah. So she has these temptations. She has the temptation for despair. And we know she was fighting that at some point she wasn't eating because he says, please eat. You're not eating. But what does she do with that? She takes it to God and she pours out her complaint. And she does it, so just demonstratively that Eli thinks she's drunk and is just, pouring her heart out. She's so upset. And when she's done with that, and Eli says, your prayer's been heard, she's done with that. She goes home, she watches, she eats, and apparently is with her husband because then they do have a baby. So is the point of her story that if you're sweet and you say your big prayers that you'll automatically get what your heart's desire was? No. But what it does mean is that God will always take care of whatever need we have. So when Lawrence and I were so desperate to have a baby, and that was not happening on the timeline we wanted, I kind of took a cue. In the scriptures, it'll talk about the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. So I prayed to the God of Hannah and Rebecca.
How beautiful.
Yes, because that God knew what I was going through. And he had heard prayers of the women in front of me. Well, a lady that we worshiped with said, Heather, if you need a child, God will get that to you. It may not be through you getting pregnant. It may be through adoption. It may be by becoming a really important adult in the life of a child that isn't, isn't related to you. But
Yeah.
you have to trust God will fulfill that need. And
Right.
that really was impactful for me, of giving over my heart to him, trusting that he would be gentle with that.
Wow. Wow. Thanks for bringing in your own personal experience on that. And I know that there's a lot of women watching that struggle with this very thing of infertility. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned that you have pointed out with this example of not to give into the temptations that come with that desire that's beautiful that God puts in us. And so, yeah, thank you for that. I guess I'll jump in with some things that in the lives, in the scriptures that I've kind of been reading through this week and thinking about what do I learn from each one. So I was going to pop in and I'll probably do kind of a rapid fire observations just very quickly. And so Eve in chapter 3 of Genesis, 1 through 6, it says, here we have the serpent saying, indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat from it or touch it, or you will die. The serpent said to the woman, you surely will not die, for God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from the fruit and ate. And she also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. And so we learn that this costs her great pain in childbirth, being multiplied in childbirth. In pain you'll bring forth children, yet your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. And so then they're sent out from the Garden of Eden to go cultivate the ground. So as I was reflecting on what I learned personally from this experience of Eve giving in to this temptation, I ended up with a top 10. I mean, God means what he says. Okay, this applies to all of us. God means what he says. Sin ruins everything. Name one thing that is ruined that sin is not at some way at the root of. Sin ruins everything. Things don't get better when sin happens, ever. What God says is always for your and my well-being. I also learned through this example to turn my back on liars. Satan lied to her, you shall not surely die. Turn your back on liars. And here's one that you brought out in your last story, or the first story you told. Don't focus on what you don't have. No wonder we're supposed to fix our eyes on Jesus. If you have Jesus, you have what you need most. And so not focusing on what we don't have, because you're going in this life to always be without something. And you'll make yourself miserable if you focus on what you don't have. Another lesson here is know when to not listen to your spouse. Okay, and the time to not listen to your spouse is when they're telling you to do something against what God says to do. Be loyal to God over family. Sometimes we're going to have to make a decision on that. And so Adam needed to be more loyal to God than he was to Eve. For men, the lesson is, of course, be a man, find your voice, and protect your family from Satan's lies. So those are some of the lessons that I believe that we get from the life of Eve. I was also looking, before I move on from that, anything you would add, Heather? Any observations on?
Well, those were just great. I love that top 10. I wrote them all down. I just think about because of giving into that temptation, now they've got this relationship that was not what God had wanted for them. This relationship that now is going to have sin in it, is going to have strife in it. And just, that just must have been devastating for them. I mean, we haven't had that. We've not been able to experience, a relationship that hasn't been tainted somehow.
Right.
But for them to have that before and after must have just been devastating.
Definitely. Yeah. My husband and I were talking about that. We were talking about when it says, yet your desire before your husband and he will rule over you, that she was always, even before sin entered, she was going to be an helpmate. So that the fact that that's not that submission is the curse, but because that was there, and it's not a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing. The headship of the man in the relationship. But yeah, we talked about how sin, when I said sin ruins everything, I'm glad you pointed out the number one thing that you're going to feel that is right away is your relationships. Mm-hmm. It is going to mess with your relationship.
Yeah.
So I was going to also pick up some things that we can learn from King David's sin with Bathsheba in 2 Samuel 11. And so as our listeners that are familiar with the scriptures will recall, it says there, now when evening came, David arose from his bed and walked around the roof of the king's house. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful in appearance. So David sent and inquired about the woman. And one said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? David sent messengers and took her. And when she came in, he lay with her. And then he goes on, it goes on to say she returned to her house. The woman conceived, and she sent and told David and said, I'm pregnant. And so as the story unfolds, King David tries to cover his tracks by giving her husband Uriah a kind of a hiatus from battle. But Uriah is so conscientious that he forbids himself the pleasure of his beautiful wife, explaining to David, quote, get a load of this quote, Heather. The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in temporary shelters, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife? By your life and the life of your soul, I will not do this thing, unquote. I mean, you would think David would hear that and be like, never mind, I can't do this. This man is so conscientious. He's so conscientious. But instead, David gets him drunk. But Uriah's goodness runs so deep that he still does what he deems is most honorable. Like, my men are out there fighting. I'm not going to stay home and have a good time. So then David puts him at the very front of the battle, as we read later, and has the remainder of the army pull back. And so Uriah is killed. So, and of course, this is going to, in this case, this is going to cost David the life of his child as the result of, and other things, is a lot more would be happening to him as well. So here's some takeaways I think that that will benefit us as we ponder this situation. One takeaway, I believe, is that temptation often happens when life gets comfortable. You don't have your battle mindset going on. And so when life gets more comfortable, look out. Temptation might be coming your way. The other one is flee fornication. The New Testament tells us flee fornication. And I'd like to throw out, it's not often going to be like Joseph, where Potiphar's wife comes in and says, how about it? That does not happen very often. What's more likely to happen, Heather, as we apply this concept of flee fornication, the stronger the chemistry you feel with someone, the more distance you're going to need physically, verbally, and emotionally. So it is human nature that there are just some people that you click with, like you are really attracted to them. And it may or may not be a sexual attraction, but you just feel like, wow, you're kind of the whole package. And so the more chemistry you feel, the more distance it's like you're going to need to pull back to the degree that there's a natural pull towards them. I mean, do you agree with that, Heather, or am I off base on that? That just seems to me a very practical way to flee fornication, because you know how we've been talking about it all starts with the wanting. Right. And if you have really good chemistry, you're really drawn to someone of the opposite sex, it just seems very, very wise to me to be like, wow, I'm going to need to really make sure that we don't spend extended amounts of time conversing. And you know what I mean? That we don't start building on that.
I mean, we know this from nature, right? If you have two potted plants, the one that gets watered is the one that thrives. So, you know, if I'm watering a relationship, it will grow. And what's that going to look like? And is that done to the detriment of my other relationship with my husband? Am I putting effort into that? Am I praying that if there's not a connection there, that am I praying for God? I mean, we're told in Titus that God works in us to will and to do both. So I can pray, God, you know, put that in me, put that will back in me.
Right. Change my heart. Change my heart. Like I want to, even King David said, create in me a clean heart. This is a very, very useful prayer even for us. And the other reason we need to resist temptation in this story that teaches us is that we are unable to see the nightmarish ripple effects that our sin is about to cause. So, I mean, it's going to be torture when it's time to pay the cost of your sin. Like, it's going to be worse than you think. And so, since we don't know what those ripple effects are going to be, there's good reason to back off, flee fornication. As I was reading through that one, I thought about a similarity, because, you know, when David gets confronted with this sin by Nathan, and Nathan, if we had time, Heather, maybe we'll do this on another program. The key to, I love how Nathan persuades David, and he's like, you are the man, you know, he does this beautiful, right? And so David says, I have sinned against the Lord. Like, he doesn't spend any time going, well, yeah, but no, he's like, I have sinned against the Lord. And that reminded me of the woman at the well, Heather, how when Jesus points out her sin, like, you've had all these husbands, she's not like, nah, or whatever. She's, you know, she accepts the reality, and she's able then to do like that 180 in her life and go and share, you know, what just happened to her and her experience. She also didn't let the shame of her forgiven sin make her unwilling to go tell the community what just happened to her. So she's immediately turning around. So I saw a few little similarities there between David and then this woman in John 4. So then I was also thinking, Heather, about King David when he numbered his army in chapter 24 of 2 Samuel. And I think we can learn from that to trust God and not our own military might, so to speak. So what I mean by that, like, because David got in big trouble for doing that, like God was to be his protection. And so I think sometimes we want to put our trust in our savings account or our IQ or even our health. Maybe it's our network of friends. Maybe it's our food pantry, you know, whatever, stocking up, or just to really realize God's the one who fights for us, and we don't need to number our military might, so to speak. So David sometimes messed up like we do other times. Are you so blown away, Heather, when you think about how David had that chance? You know, like King Saul he's got 3,000 men that he's chasing David to try to kill him. And then David He goes into a cave to relieve himself, and David sees him. He goes in. It must have been, I don't know how the arrangement went, but David is able, without Saul seeing him, his men are like, go, now's your chance. Look what God did. This is God's providence. He goes in, he cuts that little corner of Saul's robe, hides. Saul leaves the cave, and then David is like, I could have killed you. And it was another, before David does that, he is so humble. Let me pick it up in verse 8. Now afterward, David arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, saying, my Lord the king. And then Saul turns around. David bows it with his face to the ground and prostrates himself. And then David says to Saul, why do you listen to the words of men, saying, behold, David seeks to harm you? Behold, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord had given you today into my hand in the cave. And some said to kill you, but my eye had pity on you. That kind of blows me away, Heather, because if a man is chasing to kill me with 3,000 people on his side, I'm going to have a hard time having pity on him. You know what I mean? Wow. But my eye had pity on you, and I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. And he shows him, the corner of the road. And then this response from Saul, look how persuasive it is when we don't retaliate. Then Saul lifted up his voice and wept, and he said to David, you are more righteous than I, for you have dealt well with me, while I have dealt wickedly with you. And so he's pretty much well, no wonder you're going to be the king. Now I see why God's choosing you to be the king. So, wow. So do the right thing. I think the lesson here, do the right thing when your life is on the line. If you leave vengeance to God, and he will take care of your enemies, even to the point of when your life is on the line. It's very similar to Queen Esther, I think, Heather, because we learned there that she also, because she resisted the temptation to protect herself, her own life, because if she goes in front of the king and says, and stands up for her people, just showing up in front of the king can cost her life. So she's like, if I die, I die. If I perish, I perish. So she resists that temptation to protect her own life by keeping some vital information to herself. And because of that, the entire nation of Israel is not slaughtered in the book of Esther. So
and I think about with both of them, my opportunities to have to protect my own life are not often, right?
Yeah.
I'm often there aren't people looking to kill me, but I've had people look to kill my reputation before.
There you go. Oh, I love that, Heather. I love that application.
Yeah. So letting God be my defender in that.
Yes.
I'm not going to speak against you because you're God's child. Maybe they're not the king's anointed, but they're God's child. And trusting that God will take care of that. I mean, it's so hard for me when I feel like David, in your example with him, he was in the right. Saul should not have been pursuing to kill him.
Right.
But he doesn't call on his own righteousness at all. And that's so humbling to me, because I often want to offer my own defense.
Yeah.
And I've told my kids before, especially when they were little, and they'd be upset with another kid. I'm like, don't rob me of the opportunity to defend you. You stay don't retaliate against the other kid. Let me defend you in this. That is my heart. I want to do it. But if you, the other kid back, now I'm going to have to deal with your sin instead of being your defense. That's not what I want. That's not my heart. And I don't think that's God's heart for us. I think he's saying, Heather, Cindy, I want to defend you, and I can do it perfectly. Let me do this for you.
Wow. Heather, you go places that I never even thought about, and I love it. I love it. I love the applications that you're finding. Yeah. Let God protect your reputation. And let God be your defense. Yeah, yeah. Love it. So I was gonna just touch bases with Acts chapter 5 with Ananias and Sapphira when they sold that piece of property, and they kept back some of the price, and his wife knows this happens. And so then they lay it at the apostles' feet, because a lot of people were doing this. They're laying this gift at the apostles' feet that's going to be given to needy saints. But Peter says in verse 3, Ananias, why has God filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back some of the price of the land? While it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not under your control? What is this that you have conceived in this deed in your heart? You have not lied to men, but to God. And so Ananias falls down, breathes his last. Young men come and carry him out. And then his wife shows up, and then Peter asks her, tell me whether you sold the land for such and such a price. And she's like, oh yes, that was the price. And so the same fate befalls her. And so, yeah, and Peter says, why is it that you have agreed together to put the Spirit of the Lord to the test? And so, behold, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out as well. And so she falls dead as well. What do we get from, what can we learn from this? The first thing that hit me is that we can't fool God. That's why we need to not be tempted by these kinds of situations where, sometimes God creates situations where these situations are designed to humbly help others and to be a service opportunity, but we can fall into the temptation of using it instead as a platform to show off or to get human glory. But you can't fool God. God knows what's in your heart. And yeah, I think we see it a lot in the denominational world where just worship alone, that a lot of people are kind of bogarting that and using it to get human glory for themselves with performances and getting attention and, and a lot of, business like, make more money and that kind of thing. So that's something to be avoided, that we do things because we love God and we're concerned about the people, not to show, look how generous I am, or look how talented I am, or whatever. God says, I will be treated as holy by those who come near me. And that's what's holy, right?
So I immediately thought about Facebook post.
Okay.
And Ananias and Sapphira are trying to come across as more generous than they really were, right?
Right.
I was trying to come across in my Facebook post as a better mother than I really am, a better cook, a better homekeeper, more crafty. Like, am I doing these things? And then how does that affect others? Am I inciting others to feel less than? I mean, what did the people around Ananias and Sapphira feel like? That doesn't just bring up the emotion of, wow, that was really great. That could also bring up the emotion of, wow, I can't do that. I don't have that kind of stuff to give to others. So they may have thought this will just make others think well of us. They may not have thought this may make others feel poorly about themselves. And that is not how we build up the body. That is not how we treat other image bearers of God. So I think it's easy to find ways, it doesn't just have to be Facebook. It can be what stories I choose to tell or not to tell. Come across the way I want to come across rather than what may be a more honest representation.
Fantastic application. Once again, Heather Wells. Yay. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here. I learned so much from you. All right. So I'll just go through just a few quick examples and then we'll wind this down. Isn't it amazing, Heather, how Paul, like when he meets Jesus on the road to Damascus, and Jesus invites him, instead of murdering Christians, you become a Christian and, you will be the primary person who ministers to the Gentiles. And so I love that Paul resists the temptation to think, you know what, I've invested so much in Judaism that it's too late to turn back now. So that's a big, I mean, he was the epitome of like an overachiever, I mean, he had it down and he did Judaism just about as well as it could be done. And he's like, he says he counts that all as rubbish in comparison to gaining Christ. That's inspirational for anyone who's listening tonight that's thinking about being a Christian, but maybe they are going to have to give up a lot of prestige in the world in order to do that. I hope you'll find inspiration in that. For the elderly that may be listening tonight, I think there's an inspiration about resisting a certain kind of temptation in Timothy's grandmother, Lois, and in 2 Timothy 1, and then also Anna, that elderly woman who never left the temple at the age of 84, serving night and day with fasting, praying, and worshiping in Luke 2. I think both of these women are inspirational, that they resist us from thinking that we're too old to make a difference. I mean, they found instead deep spiritual purpose until the very end of their lives. And that is super inspiring, I think, that even if it comes down to all you can do is pray, prayer can change everything. And that is a beautiful, beautiful thing to do when you've got very little strength left to do anything else. So you can stay productive right until the very end. That's great. Yeah. I love, aren't you so inspired when you see women doing that? Because sometimes it's the older women that are sometimes the most spiritually focused and productive for God. Amazing. Too true. I had one that I wanted to sneak in here. About Peter. This came to my attention recently. I think it may have been in a sermon. I was trying to remember where I heard this. But they were talking about, do you remember the instance in Galatians where Paul is talking about he had come and he had to rebuke Peter to his face because Peter was eating with the Gentiles, but then when the Jewish Christians came, he stopped. And Paul said, and it was so bad, even Barnabas was carried away in the silliness. And so I was with Peter to his face. So I was thinking about this and I looked it up. Galatians was written sometime between 49 and 56 AD. Okay. So there's a situation. Peter's been rebuked to his face. He could have been tempted to say, oh, really, Paul, Christian killer, you would like to discipline me, right? Right. Jesus for truth. Did you do all these things? Were you on the Mount of Transfiguration? Right? He could have been tempted to that. Or he could have been tempted to say, you're right. It's fine. We're all good now. And then go their separate ways. And we don't talk. We don't associate. But come forward in time to 2 Peter, which was probably written about 10 years later. Okay. Peter there calls Paul in 2 Peter 3:15. He calls Paul our beloved brother. So I think about how tempting it is when people call us out on our sin, call our children out on their sin, to either deflect and put it back on them, or to say, okay, it's fine, but we don't have play dates with those people anymore. I don't go to lunch with that woman anymore, right? Right. Peter and Paul don't do that. Peter's able in humility for there to be restoration in that relationship and how that affected. Just think if those two had been at odds with each other, what damage they would have done as they're going out trying to preach a gospel of reconciliation. How could they do it? Right. But that's the same gospel we've been given. Is this God? That's what we're ambassadors of, reconciliation. And if we find having
all these relationships that, well, we used to talk and now we avoid each other, but it's all very right. That's a problem. That's not an example we've been given in scripture. I mean, that's one thing for David to say to somebody who's trying to kill him, you know, I forgive you, but I'm going to keep a healthy distance because I'm trying to kill him, right? There's one thing about healthy boundaries. There's another thing to let my own pride and my embarrassment get in the way of having true unity and fellowship.
Yes. And if those two could have unity and fellowship with that history, then it's an inspiration for us, because we cannot afford in the church to have needless division over ego.
No.
Ever. Like, we just cannot afford that. That's way too expensive. And instead we have this inspiring example. And it kind of reminds me of the proverb that, you know, the wise man loves the rebuke. Like, oh, the person who loves me the most is the one who has corrected me and set me right. So yeah, Peter must have really felt a gratitude. Whoa, this was so fun and interesting. Yeah, and thank you so much for our audience. I got so into everything you were saying, I forgot to even look over at the comments. So it's going to be fun to go through those and see what folks have said. So please accept my apology for getting so zoned in on everything Heather's saying. But next week, Heather Isla's going to be back joining us. Yes. And so we're going to start a month of conversations over something that every single person on the planet deals with and is dealing with, I believe, on some level, and that is the topic of pain. So we're going to look at all kinds of various aspects. Maybe we'll do this again, Heather, and do like case examples of people that responded to pain wisely and in the scriptures, and do some more case studies maybe a month from this week. We'll see how that rolls. So I'm going to go ahead and say goodnight to you, Heather, and just give a closing announcement that we'd like to invite our viewers to check out the live program called Answering Religious Error on Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern. There, a panel of preachers are presently discussing various ways to keep your head on straight. They also have a weekly panel that offers to answer any of your Bible questions. And that Q&A is on Wednesdays at noon Eastern time. So those are the announcements, and I'll say thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. Good night.
Good night.